Welcome to all the angels. Lovely to have you on board. This is unfortunately, the last in the series. We're going to have a bit of a break, but please jump onto the site and give us as much feedback as possible. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, what you liked, what you didn't like, all that sort of stuff. And hopefully we can bring these back in some sort of way in the future. Quickly, housekeeping, we can't see you or hear you. So please, if you've got any questions or comments, in the Q&A section down the bottom, and we will attempt to get to as many of them as possible. I will be asking them probably at the end, but if there's something that makes sense at the time, I'll just shoot it through. So without further ado, tonight we are joined by 4 of the top 50 of the Young Guns awards for 2020. We've got Bart, Leighton, Steve, and Andrew. How are you, gentlemen?
Very good, thank you.
Very well, thank you.
Happy to be here.
Good. Before we dive into the actual awards and what that actually means, Bart, can you just quickly give everyone of the Angels just a little bit of a background on how you got into winemaking and why you love it, all that sort of stuff, so that they can give a bit of a picture of who you are?
Yeah, so my life started probably very different than most. I was born in Holland, grew up there. Grew up in a region where there was a lot of farming, but my family doesn't farm at all. And I was always drawn to it. Did a few exchanges in different countries and ended up working in a winery in Germany, and loved it. And so stayed there for a while, studied viticulture and winemaking, and then went off to America and ended up to do one vintage in Australia, and it's almost 20 years ago. So yeah,
wow.
A bit of a different journey.
Is Germany to Australia?
Yeah. Oh, they were all pretty different. I'm glad I'm in Australia. So.
Right. And you now make wine for Naked, but you also work at the Chalmers Vineyards, is that correct?
Yeah. So I met Kim about 10 years ago. So Kim Chalmers is my wife. And they had a vineyard in Mildura and also a nursery, and had a vineyard in Heathcote, and there was no winemaking done. They were outsourcing that. So when I joined the team, we started playing around a little bit and started to make some different batches of wine, and then joined the Naked family probably 3-4 years ago with one of our, I think the Shiraz was the first one, and Moscato. I think that's probably the most surprising one for most people, because a lot of people don't like Moscato till they get it in the glass. So yeah, it's been good. It's been really fun.
Good stuff. And just a little bit of background on I mean, your passion I suppose would be seen anyway from what Chalmers do, would be alternative varieties. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. For me, I sort of stepped into already a moving train where we've got like 40, 50 different varieties and I think 80 different clones, and still bringing material into the country. So that was pretty challenging, trying to get my head around all these different varieties. That's how I actually started making wine. I started making wine from all the varieties that I could pick a bucket, and made it into wine in demijohns just to learn what these wines tasted like. And there were some wines that were never made into wine in Australia. So Bruce brought them in, but they were never vinified. So yeah, that was some pretty cool stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Can you give us a heads up on what's hot and what people are asking for?
Well, I think so. What's probably for us the main winner is Narradavla and Vermentino. They were brought in the early 2000s by my father-in-law, and now you see lots of them. So they actually came in as one pot plant into Australia, and from that one pot plant, there's now, lots of producers working with it. So that's pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Leighton, how are you, mate?
Yeah, super duper.
Awesome. Again, can you give everyone just a bit of a background how you got into wine and your general backstory?
Yep, I can give it a go. So I actually just heard Bart mention Mildura, which I hadn't even considered discussing, but I actually was born in Mildura and lived the first 10 years of my life surrounded by vineyards. Dad was farming sultanas at the time, and then later on wine grapes for some of the monster wineries up there. And then, eventually, what would have been 15 years after I left Mildura, we ended up planting a piece of dirt in the Pyrenees in Western Victoria. So we went in at the first step, and we put in a 27-hectare vineyard. And I guess as things developed there, I enrolled into uni and studied a bit of wine growing, and naturally dropped out of that because it wasn't that great a course. And then I found myself learning the craft in more of a hands-on capacity. And then from there, probably 8 years ago now, I sort of announced to Dad that I was the head winemaker, and it's been all uphill from that from that point. So I mean, it's a beautiful part of the world in the Pyrenees. I love the creative side of things in the winery, and I love sort of making creative things where they might not necessarily be in the winery. It gets me through the day. I love the time, the actual processing moment through harvest. When the fruit's coming in, that's when the blood's pumping and the creativity is really flowing, and get a lot of ideas and concepts about which sort of wines that you might like to play with around that time. And then later on, there's actually a time of reflection as well, where you get to look at what you've done and make some more considered choices and decide whether those spur of the moment decisions were, the right ideas or not. But it's good to have fun. I actually wrote something down earlier. I like the fact that I know what I'm doing about 90% of the time, because with that other 10% of the time, I can try and give it some creative, hopefully in the best, looking for the best outcome.
Awesome. And do you have on your vineyard, do you have a majority of one particular variety, or is it a spread?
Yep. So the vineyard's largely planted to Shiraz. It's we're a Pyrenean vineyard. So the vineyard's largely planted to Shiraz, followed by Cab Sauv, and a little bit of Sauv Blanc there, and a little bit of Cab Franc and Malbec. And we've recently grafted over just a little bit of a little more Cabernet Franc and Malbec over Shiraz. So we've changed the vines, which were Shiraz, that are now Cabernet Franc and Malbec. So our next harvest hopefully will be the first year that fruit comes into the winery, because I really actually enjoy working with the Cabernet Franc as much as anything else that comes through. But I guess the challenge in the Pyrenees is it's traditionally producing a really classical style, renowned for its Shiraz and its Cabernet, I guess. And so I guess we're looking to sort of mirror that aspect of it and give it a little bit of sass where we can.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because the Sunday range that you make for Naked does have the Shiraz and the Cabernet, but it also is pushing some of the boundaries with some of the wines.
Yeah. I mean, you've been exceptional in giving a little bit of creative license to get a few different styles on board there, and they're hit and miss, but they're
Is it
always...
something that you like to do?
Oh yeah. It's fun. It's easy to forget that it's things like orange wines and pet nats and so on are still quite niche, even though there seems to be a lot of demand and they're quite hot. They are still quite niche and quite a divisive product.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Steve, how are you?
Hello. Good. Great.
Good. Awesome. Can you give everyone a bit of a rundown on your background and how you got into wine and all that sort of jazz?
Sure. So, I mean, pretty standard for a winemaker in Australia, I suppose. It's you grow up on a vineyard. Your parents, in my case, my parents were, viticulturists or grape growers. So yeah, the vineyard was Bago Vineyards up near Wauchope on the north coast of New South Wales. Not typically the best grape growing region in Australia, but a beautiful lifestyle region. So, I mean, at a young age, I didn't know these things, and I thought it was great harvesting grapes in the rain. So yeah, it's growing up. I mean, it's kind of what else do you do when you finish school? I mean, I enjoyed science at school. I enjoyed art. I loved the agriculture part of it, and I think that's really important. That winemaking is a mix of all those three things, and I just fell into it. Really, I didn't really know what I was doing, but after I finished high school, I went to study in Wagga. So I studied at the Charles Sturt uni course, and I had a great time there. I started as an internal student, and then throughout the following years, the course went distance education. I stayed on campus because campus life was pretty fun. And yeah, throughout those years, I worked in a number of wineries and actually got my practical experience outside of my own family vineyard and family little winery for the first time, which was great. And I lapped it up. I loved it. It was so much fun and simple things, it was like, I remember working, my first, vintage outside was in Langhorne Creek down in South Australia at a pretty big winery. But I just loved, just the mechanics of it, how valves worked, how pumps worked, it was just fun. And then, yeah, so after I finished my course down in Wagga, I started traveling, and I didn't really understand that winemaking was such a global, a global industry that you could then travel overseas, do a vintage, work, and then, go for a little bit of explore and adventure, and then come across to the Southern Hemisphere and do another harvest. So you kind of jump around a little bit. And yeah, unbeknown to me, you develop these cultural, these knowledge along the way, which is awesome. And yeah, retrospectively, you look back at that and you go, they were really great times, and you learn a lot. But yeah, I suppose. So I've always had a love for it, and it wasn't really until I came to Orange in 2013, and I was working for a winery in Orange, and it just really, that's where I had my mentors, and I really got into what this region was about. I really dug my heels in and just wanted to produce some beautiful wines here. And one of the first wines that actually stood out was an orange Merlot, and I just really wanted to produce a Merlot, which you guys have for the Made by Mobs range. So 2 Merlots actually, and yeah, so there's varieties that stick out, there's moments that stick out, and I think it's just all been a fantastic ride. And I couldn't have imagined being in any other industry. And even there's so many aspects to this industry that you just wouldn't know. It's like I was talking to someone today about being extroverted, and you have to be the brand, and you have to talk about your brand. But it's such an introverted industry. You would actually, like in these isolation times, you could be out in the vineyard for days and days and days and not talk to anyone, or in the winery and not talk to anyone. So yeah, it's quite a really interesting industry where it's a bit of this and a bit of that. And as you know, going back to the art, science and agriculture, they all blend in and come together. So thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. And can you just give everyone a little bit of a background on the Made by Mobs, the brand, how there's above 600 and below 600, what that refers to?
Perfect. So yeah, it's sometimes can be confusing, and I probably don't relay the message clear enough and constant enough, I suppose. But so yeah, the above 600, so orange is classified under two GIs. So it has to be above 600 meters in elevation and within a certain region to be classified as an orange region grape or orange region wine. And then if it's within a region but below 600 meters, if it's in, like, it's classified as central ranges. So if it falls below, so that classification is basically the elevation classification dictates, you know, warm climate versus cool climate. So it's a bit of an imaginary line, and they had to cut it off somewhere. But if you kind of keep on going higher in altitude, which Andrew will attest to, it gets pretty cold. So it's cool climate viticulture. So the big difference is that I want to show, you know, I've got 2 Chardonnays and 2 Merlots, one from each of those regions. So the above 600 range is from orange, and they're generally classified as cool climate wines, structure, elegance. They're not big and full bodied. They don't have jammy fruit. Whereas the warmer climate wines fall below that 600 meters, and they're the below 600 range, and they're classified more as a fuller bodied, you know, a little bit hardier, a bit more riper fruits, you know, a little bit more kind of everyday drinking. I like to say midweek drinking wines. So yeah, they're the main differences. I hope I did that explanation okay. Sometimes I write about it better.
So does that mean if you had like a vineyard on a slope like this, it could potentially have grapes that were orange and grapes that were central ranges on the same vineyard?
Absolutely. Now, it's a tricky question, that one, actually. No, so they've basically classified, if you've got a vineyard on the slopes, they go, right, well, you're about 50% of that in the Central Ranges region and 50% in the Orange region. So when the grapes come across the, you know, into the winery across the weighbridge, half of those grapes are allocated to the Central Ranges and half are allocated. So they're put into the system and they have to be kept separate.
Right. There's a big difference in price, isn't there?
Correct, yes. So they would be kept separate. So yeah, I mean, orange fruit is sought after. So, which I just bought an orange vineyard by myself. Well, not by myself, with my partner and a lot of help and a lot of bank help. But now, yeah, so I'm a proud owner of a vineyard in Orange. So yeah, it's exciting times ahead.
Wow, awesome. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit more about that, or?
I do. How much time do we have? Yeah, so I mean, the vineyard is, so that tops out at 900 meters with Riesling up the top. It's a beautiful location. I've literally been here for 5 days. We moved in on the weekend. I hurt my shoulder moving in, so my partner Nadia did most of the work. No, it's beautiful. I don't know. I mean, it's exciting yet daunting. And yeah, it's our next big step in life. It's going to be a little fantastic journey. And yeah, I mean, being part of Naked Wines and yeah, being part of that group is you know, really important. So yeah, no, yeah, thanks guys again.
Cool. Andrew, how's it going?
Good evening.
Good to see you. Again, can you give everyone just a little bit of background on how you got into wine and winemaking and et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. So I took an unusual route as well. Going back to, I guess, the very beginnings of my adult life, wine was never something that was a high priority. Hospitality was something I did while I unsuccessfully studied about 3 other things at university. And I guess it took me about 10 years to realize that hospitality was something that I was really good at and had a passion for. So I did manage to have a career in hospitality, and I was lucky enough to become a sommelier. So I was the wine waiter in, some of the top 50 restaurants in the country. And it's really interesting when you work in that kind of environment. You get exposed to a huge amount of wine. It's fantastic. You just kind of sit in your restaurant and people just bring you wine to try. And in the beginning, you feel like a kid in a candy store. But after a little while, you end up in this slightly awkward position where someone brings you a Shiraz that they desperately want to get onto your list because, you're a top 50 restaurant. And you kind of have to say to them, look, it's a really nice Shiraz. I like this and I like this about it. But unfortunately, it's really similar to this Shiraz and that Shiraz that I already have on my list. So I'd love to list it, but I don't have a place for it. And so I found myself spending a lot of time and energy looking for new wines, looking for different wines, looking for wines that had a story, wines that had something more than just being good wines. I mean, when you're working in the kind of environment where people are paying over $100 a head to come and have dinner, they're not paying to be fed, they're paying to be entertained, they're paying to have an experience. So, the subtle subtext of what I was telling a lot of the people who were bringing wine to me to try was, bring me a story, bring me something that I can engage my customers with. So coming out of that kind of environment was when I met the guys that I work with now at Bent Road up here in Queensland. And at the time, they had recently launched the Mort label, which hopefully all the angels out there will be familiar with. And the whole idea of this label is that it is an experimental label. It is a label entirely designed to do different and interesting things. And by nature, all of the wines that fall into that category, they have a story. They have that other interesting factor, that level of engagement that I was so desperately seeking in the wines that I was buying at the time. So when I met Glenn and Robert, who I work with now, it was just a completely synergistic opportunity to kind of start traveling from Noosa down to the Granite Belt, which is a 5-hour drive, and kind of doing the weekend warrior thing, completely unpaid as a volunteer. And I guess I kind of parlayed that into a position as, the second winemaker, and kind of I suppose, forging my own role in taking this experimentation in a different direction. I mean, I guess I should also mention that I was born and bred in Adelaide, so I have the very interesting pathway of having grown up in South Australia and then moved to Queensland to become a winemaker.
So you just learnt on the job. Is that pretty much how it happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I came into this, I had a lot of theory. I had studied wine in various capacities, but had never made any wine, which is kind of how I ended up here, was, just wanting to get my hands dirty and wanting to connect some dots between grapes on a vine and wine in a bottle. And that kind of just organically grew into a job, which is the most fantastic way to find a job.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned the Petite Mort. Can you just explain, first of all, what that means for the angels?
Yes. I mean, as I said, the Petite Mort brand was created in order to fill a need that Glenn had before I even came into this business. Glenn's background is in medical research. So he has a background in science. I also have a background in science. So both of us like to play and to learn and to, empirically experience what happens when you do different and interesting things. So Glenn had created the label before I even came along. And the label started off with the photograph of the skeleton, which hopefully some of you are familiar with. It's a photograph taken by a now infamous photographer by the name of Ray Cook. And Ray and Glenn were uni chums back in the day. So Glenn bought that photograph longer ago than he cares to admit. And it was just the obvious choice when we wanted to do an experimental label. So having had the photograph, the next thing you do is you canvass friends and family for ideas for a name. And they almost exclusively come up with sexual innuendo and double entendre. So for any French speakers out there, you may realize that La Petite Mort, which literally translates as the small death, does not mean that at all in French. It's actually a slightly cheeky reference to orgasm.
There you go. Everyone knows now. And also, we need to talk about the region that you guys are in and making wine from, because it's quite a unique region. Can you give everyone a bit of a spiel on the region?
Yeah, it's a really interesting segue from what Steve was just talking about in orange, because I suppose there's this little granite belt orange rivalry where, according to Jancis Robinson, so this is not my own details, the Granite Belt is the highest wine region in Australia. However, I will admit that Orange has vineyards that are higher than us. So Orange tops out at about 1 kilometre, we top out at about 800 metres. But I believe as an entire region, we are on average higher. And that altitude, the same story that Steve was telling, that is the entire reason that we can exist. We are so far north up here that without the altitude, it would just be too hot and too humid to grow grapes. We have the fortune of sitting basically right on top of the Great Dividing Range, but just inland of the peak of it. So the mountains protect us from all of the humid, tropical, subtropical weather that Brisbane and the Gold Coast are famous for. And in fact, our climate here is quite continental. And we were just talking before the session started this evening. And I'm probably experiencing some of the coldest conditions of anyone on the chat tonight. We've had, I could count on one hand the number of mornings that have not been below zero in the past month and a half. We have -2, -5, -6. Frost on the car every morning. It's really cold where we are, despite being the second most northerly wine region in Australia.
Wow. It's funny. I mean, the varieties that you guys seem to grow and play around with aren't typically cool climate varieties, though, are they?
Well, it's one of those interesting things. Being far north, we have a hot summer like everyone else does. And our summer is not as hot as Barossa. So if you want to make that comparison, we're definitely cool climate. But our vintage starts off quite warm and quite sunny. And what changes is that around mid-February, whilst our days remain full of sunshine and kind of, high 20s, maybe pushing into the low 30s, our night times cool down. So we have this incredible long tail of ripening. And it actually gives us one of the longest vintages in Australia. We start harvesting as early as mid-February, and we're still, picking grapes potentially well after Easter. So it's a very long window for us.
Wow. Amazing. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for all that. Well, I'll just quickly jump to a few questions because we've got a lot here. So firstly, Fred Chilton asks, Bart, which grapes were not vinified and why? I think he was referring to your initial statement that some were.
Yeah, so we had, there's lots of varieties. I already said there's about 40 different varieties. One that is a bit of a pet favorite of mine is called Pavana. It's super rare. It's even, it came from Italy, but it's almost hard to find there. I think we're the only ones that have it in the vineyard. And we don't have much of it, but we've planted a bit more. And it's quite unusual variety. It's quite soft and light and elegant. It's not a big sturdy red, but there's a couple of varieties now. We open our vineyard up to other winemakers to play with it. So we've, like Nocciola is quite a sort of rarish grape that is a bit in upcoming since people start making skin contact whites. There's a few regions in Italy where people play with that, and so of course then here people are looking at that as well. I mean, there's so many different things. Schioppettino, I can give you the full list, but there's, and then of course also understanding what these varieties do in Australia. We're such a young country that if you think about it, all of Australia is planted with 5 main varieties in every region. So that regionality that I think I'm really drawn to in winemaking is looking at that sense of place. And now what's really exciting, and I think that's what also came through in the Young Guns, is that people are exploring. They're like, Australia is such a interesting wine country right now. We have so many things to offer, but also there's no restrictions what we can plant where. And we are really in the midst of finding out where we should grow certain things. Like you think Mornington Peninsula and Pinot Noir, Granite Bells is doing really great things where people don't expect the things you see from there. But then sort of the inland warmer regions that are known for bulk wine are planting varieties that are used to hot climate, like Nera d'Avola, that is from Sicily. And all of a sudden we're making these really great quality wines coming out of regions that might not be known for that. And then there's, there's varieties that have been grown here for a long time, but Hunter Semillon, such a great wine. That's what's really exciting. So there's lots to play with, and I think there's lots for me to play with in our winery and make new wines. The exciting bit is then for other people taken to other regions and explore what we can do. But yeah, I make a lot of different batches, like a little bit like Andrew was saying, we do a lot of experimenting. I think I make like 60 or 70 different vinifications of wines. So yeah, and everything from 30 liters to 8,000 liters, so it's quite different.
And then quickly, while I got you, Jonathan Horan also asks, which wine from Heathcote do you enjoy most, excluding yours?
Oh, difficult question, because that's a good one too, because Heathcote is such a well-known region for Shiraz. So it's easy to find a really good Shiraz from Heathcote, in my opinion. So anything that is not so well known, for me, sparks interest. So there's a few people playing around with Fiano. Very cool. Yeah.
It'd have to be one of my wines, wouldn't it, Bart?
Oh, absolutely. It's, I mean, you wouldn't want to put somebody's name to it, but yeah, no, I love what you're doing. I mean, that's why we're working together.
Okay, cool. We've got Steve. This is for Andrew. Steve, he says the Marsanne blend and the Saperavi Shiraz was both sensational. What other unusual treats do you have in store for us?
Well, we do have a wine which we are bottling tomorrow. It's an Alsatian blend. We're going to release it under the name Pinot Gris because that's familiar to everyone, but it's actually got some Gewürztraminer and some muscat in it as well. And it's what the Alsatians in the northeast corner of France refer to as a gentil. The word gentil means nice. It's a really kind of bland word, but basically it refers to just a pleasing blend of any number of the 4 noble varieties of that part of the world. And the Pinot Gris, Gewurz, and Muscat are 3 out of the 4 noble varieties of Alsace. So that is definitely a wine to look out for. And we will, as I say, be bottling it tomorrow. So I've got to be up very early for that. And in the next 2 or 3 weeks, it will reach naked, and I'm sure that it will be online in the very near future. I believe that, Mark, you're quite excited to get this wine.
Absolutely. It's going to be awesome. And we've got another question here from Jonathan to Leighton. Leighton, can you tell us a little bit more about grafting Malbec over Shiraz? When will that wine be available? What vintage? And what will it be labeled as?
Who knows? We're not sure what it will be labeled as. We actually only grafted half a hectare of Malbec, so not much fruit at all. However, we only had 2 rows of Malbec previously, so barely enough to make a barrel each year. So it was just a really frustrating thing to have happen all the time. So we've taken on a little bit more. So the grafting, the exercise of grafting, I guess, from what I understand, is you need a dominant base vine. So the Shiraz, it's quite a vigorous vine, and it grows at quite a high capacity, I guess, with good vigor. And so if you whack a little Malbec bud into the side of that, the Shiraz trunk is going to have enough energy to push that Malbec and get it formed. So what we found generally is that we miss a year, basically. So we grafted those vines in, look, I can't remember what happened yesterday, but I think we grafted those vines
some time ago.
Going back some time now. So we've missed the 2020 harvest with that patch, and we'll look to get some new fruit out of there. Actually, part of the reason why we grafted the Cab Franc and the Malbec together was because we had a cellar hand that came into the winery a few years back, and he made he managed to get his hands on some Malbec and some Cabernet Franc from another winery, and he made an exceptional Malbec Cabernet Franc blend. It was really pure in its fruit. He didn't give it any oak, and he didn't give it any sulfur, and he released it really early. So it was really super juicy and vibrant. And since that time, I've basically been wanting to burn his idea. So I've taken the opportunity to make it happen.
Okay, we've got a bit of a technical question here, so jump into whoever wants to answer it. But Chris Yates asks, what is rotundone? Why is it a prominent characteristic in cool climate wines? And how do I appreciate its balance in a tasting? Who wants to jump in?
Right. I don't know. I don't know much about it.
So,
But rotundone is the pepper compound, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Go, Steve.
Go, Steve.
No, I mean, it's more of a history lesson than anything. No, it was a few wine conferences ago. Maybe I think I might have still been at uni, so in the late 2000s. And there was a research project that they announced they found rotundone. It was like this big thing, and then it was in the news that night that rotundone, it's a thing. But yeah, it's a peppery compound in Shiraz, and it's not everybody can taste it, as with most things. It's you have your thresholds. So some people just don't taste rotundone. and some Shirazes don't have it. And my understanding is that it's more prevalent in cool climate Shiraz. And yeah, what was the second part of that question, Mark? It was
how does he appreciate it? Its balance in a tasting. How can he pick it up?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, as with everything, maybe it can be too overpowering sometimes if your threshold depends on your threshold, and if you can't pick it, you just can't. Maybe you have a low threshold. So, you know, I always say like you like what you like, and if you don't get seeing it too much of it, maybe you know the wine isn't for you, or but don't discount a Shiraz on its lack of or too much rotundo in characters, I think. I don't know. Anyone else? Throw it to the group.
I think it segues nicely into this idea that, you know, as modern New World winemakers, we often have choices about how we call our wines. So you will find Shirazes out there in the world that are referred to as Syrah, which is the French synonym for Shiraz. Same grape, two different names, just like Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio. And I think these kind of cooler climate styles and, you know, the resulting chemical compounds that you find that give the wines their classic nature kind of, for me as a little bit of a purist, you know, they form the difference between something I would label as a Shiraz and something I would label as a Syrah, if that was kind of my plan.
Okay, cool. Why don't we just jump straight in now to the young guns of wine? Who wants to tell everyone what that is, what it actually means, and how you got voted into it?
Well, I guess I'd hope that it was kind of self-evident that the Young Guns of Wine is a competition that promotes and celebrates the young and upcoming winemakers in this country. And it's a nomination process where you nominate yourself. You basically enter the awards, and then you throw your hat in the ring and see what happens.
Do you have to enter a wine, or do you have to, or is it based on a suite of wines? How does it work?
Yeah, so you enter two wines. I think I enter two wines, and they go through tasting panel, and I think from that tasting panel, the top 50 come out, and then it's more like a public. You go through, and then you have the People Choice Award. Normally there's a tasting. This time it all had to be virtual, so it was a bit more difficult. But normally there would be events, and people would go and taste the wine, pretty much like a naked event, where people come and taste and, you know, pick, and maybe a little bit what Andrew was saying, like pick what they like about your story or about the wines, or it really often is a bit of a mixed thing, I think, when you talk about wine emotions and taste. Yeah, so this year was quite different because it all had to be online. So we didn't have the chance to really connect with people as much.
And what do you think, what wines did you enter, and why do you think they grabbed the attention?
For me, we entered basically our go-to wine, so a Vermentino and a Nero d'Avola. And in our brand, I mean, so the other brand outside Naked, that's our workhorses that are our go-to wines. So we wanted to put them forward because that's what we sort of rely on.
Right. Leighton, what? How about yourself?
I think the Young Gun Awards they're quite a contemporary take on what a good-looking wine is. I think as far as I know, the thing is judged by sort of wine professionals, sommeliers, and winemakers alike. So it's in many senses it's sort of a peer review opportunity. And yeah, for all of us to get through to the top 50. It's I guess it just shows that we're doing the right things and putting some good wines forward. I think I put a Cab Sav and a Sav Blanc forward this time, or maybe a Cab Franc, I can't remember. It was I actually put 100% oaked Hungarian oaked Sauvignon Blanc forward. It tastes delicious, but can't sell it. It's like a Sav Blanc that looks like a Shardy. They got stuck at 3 grams residual sugar. It's perfect. So it's a fun competition. It is a shame that like the annual Naked tasting events that won't be going forward this year. Yeah, it was a bit of something of a non-event, quite similar to what we're doing here. It was a bit of an online process, which was a bit of fun.
Yeah. And Steve, what wines did you enter?
I entered a Grenache and a Cabernet's blend. The reason I entered those were, Grenache is something that is getting closer and closer to my heart. I'm loving the variety. I'm loving, I've got a little patch of Grenache down in the Central Ranges, so a little bit warmer. And it just soaks up that heat. It just loves the climate down there. So I'm excited for the future of that variety in Australia, but especially at my little vineyard down there. It's an organic vineyard too, so it's easily farmed organically. And then the Cabernet's blend, it was one of the first wines that I put together working at this vineyard. So it was, again, a bit of an emotional kind of throw to the panel of the sommeliers and the judges and the likes for the panel. But I want to say that the judging of the Younggunner wines is quite different to the judging of like normal, your wine show circuits and your big Sydney Royal shows. So basically it's an open book. So the judges, the sommeliers all sit around in a big table and I'm not sure how many there are, but they all look at the wine. They look at the labels. They talk, they ask questions about the wine. They talk amongst each other. They might get on the social media, have a look at your social media presence, your internet, your marketing, your branding. It's a whole encompassing package. So it's not just based on the wine and what it tastes like. It's about, I suppose, future leaders in the industry. It's about getting these young people and giving them an opportunity to shine and showing what Australia is capable of. And it's a great little competition. And luckily, time is on my side. I've got a few more years of entering it.
What's the age limit?
Might be 45 or 40. So
I believe it's 45.
Yeah.
I'm out. I'm 40. I decided I won't bother because it's actually, if anything, it's given me a new perspective on, age.
Andrew, just quickly, what wines did you enter and why?
Yeah, this is my second year in the Young Guns of Wine. Last year, I made it through to the top 12, which was a really exciting thing. And it's amazing how much weight this award carries. And I think, like Steve was saying, and I think Bart might have alluded to as well, it's different and it's progressive and it's representative of a different way of looking at wine. As a winemaker, where my babies, the wines that I really hang my hat on, are unusual and experimental, and we're just starting to introduce some of that to Naked as well. Steve, who asked the question earlier, was referring to the Shiraz Saperavi, which we call Shirazaravi in-house, and just the idea of doing these wines that are rustic and old-fashioned and lo-fi and all of these kind of hipster kind of words that I hesitate to use because I don't want to be part of that culture. But they're wines that are not traditionally rewarded in the kind of wine shows that Steve was mentioning, you know, the standard everyday wine shows where, you know, it's very clinical and everyone's wearing a lab coat and it's just rows and rows of glasses. The young gun of wines and this idea of looking at the wine and tasting it in the context of who is this person and what are they trying to do and how are they contributing to the industry, I think is a much more holistic approach. So last year I took advantage of that and I entered 2 of our very different, very unusual and very experimental wines. And the feedback I got from them was that these are 2 very, very interesting wines, but you know, maybe next time you could show us that you can do something else. So this year I entered 1 very crazy wine, which is, it's actually the partner to the wine that we're about to bottle tomorrow for Naked, the Gentil. We also do a version of that which has extended skin contact, which is very unusual for a white wine. Most white wines are made with no skin contact. This one has about 2 months of skin contact, which is a very long time. But it is a similar blend, just the other way around. So this is Gewurz Muscat Pinot Gris, as opposed to the Naked wine we're about to release, which is Pinot Gris Gewurz Muscat. But the other wine we did was what we call our Rosso. And again, there's a parallel to this wine. The Rosso that I did for Young Guns is a Nebbiolo with a little bit of Barbera in it. And that's a very traditional blend from a place called Langhi, which is in the north of Italy, and they call it a Langhi Rosso. Hence ours is called the Rosso. For Naked though, we did a Sangiovese Nebbiolo blend, which is very much kind of, I guess, inspired by the same kind of Northern Italian food and wine, easy drinking sort of idea.
Can you quickly just tell people what the extended skin contact does for a white wine?
I guess the short version is that it is a white wine made like a red wine. So for most of the winemakers here and for the vast majority of wines in the world, I suppose, when you make a white, the first thing you do is you press the grapes. So you separate the juice from the skins and the seeds and the stalks and all the solid matter. And then you ferment just the juice. When you make a red wine, traditionally, you ferment at least the skins and the seeds, in some cases some stalks as well, because you want to extract the colors and the flavors and the textures that come from the skins and the seeds in your red wine, because people often don't stop and think that most red grapes still have white juice in them. So you need the color from the skins. However, you can ferment white grapes with the skins and the seeds left in, and you end up getting something which is a very unusual style of wine. We used to call them orange wines, but as Steve will tell you, that can get very confusing when we have a wine region called orange. So some people have tried to float the concept of amber wines, but I think mostly we just call them skin contact wines now. And they come out with those kind of textures and flavors and structures that come from the skins and the seeds. And they're things called tannins, which, and I guess the thing you can liken it to is a glass of iced tea, where you get some lemon and some fruit, but you also get some grippy, chalky, textural kind of effects as well.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, and Malcolm has a question for all of you. So all of you he'd like to hear from. As part of the Young Guns experience, what was the biggest takeaway that you're going to remember and then apply to your career going forward?
Just keep doing what I'm doing. I think, like it was really good to be in that lineup and also see what everyone is doing. I mean, again, like Australia is so exciting with seeing all these different wines and interpretations and winemaking techniques. I mean, it's some really crazy, cool stuff is happening. But for me, I've found that I've found my path and what we're doing. It's really nice is to get that peer review and say, you know, like your wines are solid, because I can think they're really great wines, but it's nice to get that recognition. But yeah, so for me, I won't be changing anything. It's sort of like a little encouragement, you know, keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah, I like Bart's response. It's yeah, it shows what we've been doing is working, and it also lets me understand that it's worth taking a risk. I've been fortunate enough to be responsible for my own poor ferments over the last few years. So, you know, I just chalk it down to, you know, a missed one. So, yeah, it's good to go out on a limb in the winery in the view of something great, in achieving something great.
Steve?
I also like Bart's response. No, I think, what did I learn from it? And yeah, so I mean, you can do anything with winemaking. I think there was someone said before, it's quite difficult to sell a product. I thought it maybe that oaky Sauvignon Blanc, but you know, if it's an art. So what it's really given me is the, you know, I suppose, unleash the boundary. And as Andrew makes these, we'll call them skin contact wines. So, you know, there's different things. So there's an award in the Young Gun of Wine competition that is a danger wine award. And it goes to the most, I suppose, let's say innovative or exciting new wine or different wine. So it might not necessarily be what you think. I think this year it was a Moscato mixed with hops or something like that. Yeah. So let's say beer and wine.
It's a delicious wine.
It is a delicious, I haven't had it, so it sounds nice. So. But yeah, so you can, it's limitless. The boundaries are pretty open, and this competition allows, I suppose, freedom of wine exploration.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to toe the party line on this one as well. I think the thing you take away from these events, and particularly when you get to do the face-to-face parts of them, which is really very similar to when we do the huge naked tasting events, which is the most incredible journey to go on, is that, you know, just because we're doing something that is maybe not the mainstream, it is maybe not recognized and celebrated, you know, as part of the status quo, I think people are engaged with what we're doing and people are appreciating our stories. And I think, you know, there's a new wave of wine consumers coming through. And I think it's a little bit that concept of not my dad's beer, where, you know, the old days of the Australian classics are starting to fall away. And I think we're starting to look at making better wine, more interesting wine. And I think people are looking to be more engaged with all of the brands in their life. And that's, for me, very much the feedback I'm getting, and the really kind of rewarding experience of being part of things like Young Guns and like Naked, is that people really are saying, tell us your stories. We want to buy your story. We want to be part of your story.
Fantastic. Well, gents, time's flown by. We're at the end of the night. Thank you so much for giving up your time and shouting out to all of the angels. everyone, there's been some great commentary and some really nice comments for all of you. So thank you very much. If there's anything you'd like to say, go away, start talking now pretty clearly. No, nothing. That's cool.
Oh, I would encourage everyone, like a Naked, it's probably when you see the wines that Naked has to offer, don't be shy to pick something you've never tasted before or something totally random. My wife has this wine list pick method when we go to a restaurant. It's random, ridiculous, where you know, get something that is out of the price range or get something that you never heard of. And it's a great way to get exposed to new things. And you know, when you don't have it in your glass, you can't really know what it is and be surprised because there's so much cool stuff out there.
I love it.
I think Naked offers an incredible opportunity to take risks because, you know, there's a money back guarantee. If you hate the bottle, you don't have to pay for it. So, you know, be adventurous, go out there and try some things, do something that you've never done before.
Yeah, you never know until you try it. That's right. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. It's been fantastic. To all the angels, thank you very much. As I said at the beginning, this is the last one in this series. So if you've got any comments, feedback, if you want to see it again, if you don't, anything, just please jump on the site and let us know. And hopefully we can bring it back sometime in the future. Good night, everyone. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Thanks very much.